You know, I was thinking about the rumored N64 classic and the new Crash Insane trilogy, and I have to say, my least favorite console generation is probably the first and second, but the fifth is up there. I know that you probably grew up on it. I know that I did, and it does have some commendable games, but the PlayStation 1 and N64 era provides nothing that hasn't been done better somewhere else. Before I get into this, I want to tell you all to calm down. I might have said that the first and second console generations are the worst, but that doesn't mean that they're not important. Games like Pong and Asteroids are important to our video game culture, but they aren't as fun as, let's say, Mario. That being said, when you're making a list, something has to be at the bottom. In this case, the 32-bit and 64-bit era is at the bottom of my list. Let me reiterate, it does not mean that all of the games are trash. It just means that it's at the bottom of my list. Go ahead and leave your nasty comments anyway, I don't give a shit. The fifth console generation was very important to video games. It was the big jump from 2D to 3D. There were games that tried it previously to some success, but the PlayStation 1 and N64 allowed true 3D to be achieved much easier. Not isometric 3D, not 3D sprites, not Mode 7, true 3D. It's the first time we get to see our favorite characters in 3D, like Mario, Bomberman, Sonic, Link, and some new favorites like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. Bomberman might sound out of place now, but remember at the time, he was very popular. The problem is that since this tech was so new, and nobody knew what the hell they were doing with it. We made it so far in 2D gaming. The 16-bit era had some of history's best work, but now we were more or less pushed back to square one. Developers had to face a lot of challenges that they've never dealt with before. How do you move three-dimensionally with an extra axis? What should the camera be doing? Does the user have control over that camera? Should we avoid that and just make a more high-fidelity side-scroller? How many polygons can we use? What should textures look like? How much should the user be able to explore? How do we set boundaries? How far off in the distance can the player see? Mario 64 is a good game, but they made the world so big that they left no room on the cartridge for textures. That's why this is the ugliest Mario game in existence. And the N64 controller makes this game very frustrating, even though this controller was made solely for this game. The N64 controller is a testament to how little the industry knew about 3D at the time. They knew that we needed extra control pads for moving objects through a 3D space, but in looking for a solution, they overcomplicated things. This section of the controller ends up rarely being used, and the joystick is probably the worst joystick I have ever used on a video game console. It has zero fidelity. Another good example is GoldenEye. This paved the way for first-person shooters on a console. The control scheme is abysmal. Seriously, if it's been a while, go back to your N64 and give it a try. After all of the modern first-person shooters you've been playing, it's going to be really hard to adjust. It was a decent attempt, and there are other games that even came out after GoldenEye that controlled far worse. If you do want to go back, I would recommend getting the remastered Perfect Dark for the Xbox 360. That game controls very well, and GoldenEye would have controlled very well too if they released that remastered instead of that garbage Reloaded game. The PlayStation 1 controller was better, but it was not created with 3D movement in mind. The DualShock was the correct answer, but that didn't come out till later. I don't want to get too far into this because I already made a video series on the history of modern video game control schemes that goes way into detail on how we came up with these control scheme standards that we have today and why they are so important. Long story short, we need two control surfaces to move us in 3 dimensions. If you want to watch that, there's a playlist right up there. But then there is Crash Bandicoot, a game that could only thrive in this era. The camera is locked, so you do not need a separate control surface to control it. However, the angle changes, and thus the movement controls vary wildly. In Crash 2, there's a jetpack level where moving forward and backward is L1 and R1, or in the Insane trilogy, it's updated to L2 and R2. This is drastically different from the rest of the game and messes you up real bad considering that the whole game up until this point, you're taught that up moves away and down moves towards the camera. Then there are platforming levels where you run towards the screen at things that are just off the screen that you can't see. Then there are levels where the game is just a side scroller. These aren't bad games. These are good games, just only good at the time. They just cannot work in today's world. In the case of the Insane trilogy, it's not that Crash Bandicoot has always been difficult and gamers are worse now. It's that they did a job updating the game.
This has got to be one of the single worst levels I've ever seen in a video game.
Oh! Yes! This type of difficulty is just frustrating. It's not as rewarding as something that requires skill and learned responses. I know that a game like Crash Bandicoot could never work in today's advanced 3D market because they already tried it twice and nobody cared. I've already made a video on why a potential Crash sequel or reboot would never work, and I'll link to it right here. Yes, I like linking my old videos. They need love too, all right? At the time of that video, everybody was saying that they were gonna make a reboot, but I said they were gonna do a remaster, and god damn it, I predicted it right. I'll leave a playlist at the end so you can catch up on your homework. Anyway, it is this reason that this gaming era feels so unstructured and chaotic. There is merit to be had for innovating and paving the way for predecessors, no doubt about that. But a lot of these games, too many I'd say, just do not have the same sort of replayability. They did not age well. Given the choice, I'd much rather be stuck in the 16-bit era, or Gen 6 or 7, at least by then we had 3D down pat. I know that some of your favorite games are in this era. First of all, your favorite Mario game should not be Super Mario 64. If that's the case, take that bullshit and get right the fuck out of here. Ocarina of Time is a lot of people's favorite Zelda game, and thus people's favorite game of all time. Personally, how do I put this? I don't hold that to the same accord. One thing holding it back is this godforsaken controller. The other is that it's not that good of a fucking game. It's a series of fetch quests, but you don't know what you're fetching unless you played the game 1,000 times already. Other than that, they actually did a very good job working with the hardware. The camera is garbage, but they remedied this by allowing you to lock on enemies with the Z trigger. The world is surprisingly large and full of life for an N64 game, but that's not saying much. Now that I've rustled your jimmies with that, I'll link to another video on why I think Ocarina of Time is not the best Zelda game. It's Breath of the Wild, and it used to be A Link to the Past. Take your nostalgia and throw it in the trash, because it has no place here. The takeaway from this video should be that I consider the 32 to 64-bit era to be weak because it was a learning experience for a lot of developers and some console manufacturers. And by some, I mean Nintendo. The 16-bit era was amazing. Some of the best games that are timeless, so no, I'm not just knocking on Gen 5 because it's old. You can be old and still great. My personal favorite console generation is kind of a toss-up between Gen 4 and Gen 7. And you can all make fun of me for liking the Xbox 360 era more than the N64 era in the comments. So what do you guys think about the 32 to 64-bit era? That is Generation 5. That's the N64, the PlayStation 1, the Sega Saturn. What else? Towns Marty, Atari Jaguar, that's one that I know. The 3DO, the Amiga CD32, Apple Bandai Pippin. Remember that guy? What are some of your favorite games from this era that you think still hold up? Or what are some that you thought were fine but are terrible now? Rogue Squadron, that's another one. That game's great. Not with this dumbass joystick though, it's not. Leave it in the comments below. Add me on Twitter. All this other social media garbage. New videos every single Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Wednesday nights is Wulff Den Live. Join us at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time for our live podcast where we will talk. Right here, I'll put the playlist of all of the videos that I talked about in reverse order. And right here is my last video on why there's no real good third-party Switch docks. Thank you guys very much. Have yourselves a very good week.